Welcome to the WriterDojo with your host, Steve Diamond.
What is best in life, Conan?
And Larry Correia.
To crush your enemies, to see them driven before you, and to hear the lamentations of their women.
Today's episode, character growth and consistency.
Welcome back to the WriterDojo, everybody. Glad to be back with you. Today, we have a special treat for you. Today is the return of bad Twitter advice.
Yep. Our subject today is going to be character growth and development, but this came about because every time I find really horrible advice, writing advice on Twitter, we like to share it with you guys, the listeners. Or if you guys also, if you find really bad, horrible writing advice, feel free to send it to us because we love to break it down. Because let me tell you, Twitter is the worst place in the world for a lot of things, but especially writing advice.
Oh my gosh. I mean, the sheer levels of stupidity that we see on Twitter is I wish I could say it was surprising, but Twitter's kind of a cesspool and a kind of the hive of scum and villainy.
And we'll never name these writers.
No, they don't. Well, they're not writers.
Yeah, that's the sad part. Some of them actually are, which makes it... Our next bad writing advice one is actually a writer.
Oh, I didn't realize that person.
I looked her up. She's actually published.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's depressing.
Yeah, this one's not, as far as I know, but I'm going to go ahead and... but just so you guys know, a little inside baseball here. Because we don't name these people, I read all these tweets as if they're from the same person.
Yes.
So I use the same voice for all of them. So
okay, everybody.
Here we go.
Brace yourselves.
The beginning of any story should show the character as the complete opposite of who they change into by the end of the story, and show why that character can't/won't change as their current selves. The first time they are forced to change is the catalyst, which starts their journey.
Oh, good grief.
I know, it's so bad. So to read that again in English,
the only reason that quote is worth listening to is because we get to listen to it in bad advice person voice.
I love bad advice person voice. And so basically in our heads now, all the bad advice on Twitter comes from the same person.
Yes.
We'll have to, when I'm not banned on Facebook, we'll have to come up with a bad writing advice voice for Facebook.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. So but basically what she says, the beginning of any story should show the character as the complete opposite of who they change into by the end of the story, and show why that character can't/won't change as their current selves. The first time they're forced to change is the catalyst, which starts their journey. So why is that horrible advice, Steve?
Well, because the idea that your character has zero consistency throughout the life of their journey through their plot arc is absurd to me.
You think about it, if you think about like every successful story there are a handful where a character does a 180, where a character is totally different. But what percentage of stories would you say that is?
It's pretty small. I think more often than not, what we see from that sort of thing, show we both like, and the character that I think is both of our favorites in the show, Stranger Things.
Yeah, it's a good show.
Steve. Team Steve.
I'm Team Steve, all 100%.
I'm obviously Team Steve.
Steve starts out as the bully.
He's a complete jerk face.
He's a douchebag.
He treats everybody horribly. And then he has a moment where things catalyze in his mind and he realizes, oh, I've been a complete jerk face.
Yeah.
And then he changes. And then he becomes the single best character in the entire show.
And it's not just and actually I think later seasons they kind of do him wrong and make him a little more comic relief.
Yeah.
I think Steve is the best character on the show because he's not even a 180 though, because he's still kind of himself. He's still the same guy.
Yeah.
But he has definitely some hero moments like revelation. And also one of the kids he used to pick on and like a kind of kid he thought was a dork becomes like his best friend.
Yeah. It's I think we see it there. That's like one, but even then, like the seeds of who he was already there.
Yeah. You think about if this woman is giving advice like this should be like every story.
Right.
If every story has the same character arc, what is the point?
Exactly.
This is like the kind of story she likes, and she's like insisting that everybody needs to open their stories that way. That's just foolishness.
Yeah. And the other thing that I see in this is I'm wondering if she's thinking of the typical like villain redemption plot arcs.
Okay, so let's look at like
you know what I mean?
Star Wars. So
okay. Sure.
That's the big one.
Sure.
You got your whole Anakin Skywalker. Yeah. He goes from little kid to good guy
To whiny little punk.
to whiny little punk, who's actually the Clone Wars does a much better job of making you like, why is this
the
guy
cartoon,
cool?
yeah, for sure.
Then he goes complete psycho bad guy with like no explanation. It's really horrible in that movie.
Yes.
And then the end, he gets redeemed.
Yeah.
So I mean, that's more of a kind of a roller coaster up and down, and the character is really super inconsistent through that. So I don't know if that's
But I mean, if we're talking about Star Wars in the vein of when it first came out, you know, the original and good trilogy, the only good trilogy that Star Wars has ever made.
yeah.
So if we're talking about that original Star Wars trilogy, then the only thing that people ever see there, I mean, the opening scene is basically the Star Destroyer chasing after the frigate, and then the Krillin cruiser, and then you see the whole hallway scene battle between the rebellion forces and Darth Vader's stormtroopers.
Great intro.
It's a fantastic
Great
intro.
intro.
And the first exposure you have to Darth Vader is he walks in like a complete like one of the baddest mamma jammas in the entire universe.
Yeah,
He walks in
7
through the
feet
fog.
tall.
Oh yeah, he walks in and he's just like, I own this place. I own everyone in here.
Yeah.
I am the best.
Chokes a dude.
Yep.
You know,
does the whole thing. And then from that whole first movie, he's a bad guy. Whole second movie, he's a bad guy until the very end, and you start seeing, wait, he actually has some deeper motivations. Like, he finds out, we find out, that Luke is in fact Darth Vader's son. Crazy.
Yeah. I feel too bad about movies where been out long as we've been alive. So
Longer than I've been alive. So,
wow, I am older than you.
You
I
are.
keep forgetting that.
I know. So then you fast forward into the third movie, and that's when his Darth Vader's full arc is really catalyzed. And
Does he do a complete 180?
but he doesn't do a complete 180, I don't think, because the seeds are sown throughout. I wouldn't say the first movie, but definitely the second movie. The seeds are sown, and then throughout the third movie, you realize what's going to happen. So the way this nameless miscreant on Twitter is explaining it is that it's like a heel turn, like out of nowhere, like they're supposed to all of a sudden become a different character, and that's absurd to me.
Yeah. It's interesting because it's more that you can have a character flip some things. You can have a character, repent of their evil ways, or you can have a character go from good guy to bad guy.
Or bad to good,
or
whatever.
bad to good. But they're still kind of going to be on an arc.
Yeah.
You very rarely see the flip. Even like you think about Breaking Bad.
Mhm.
We've talked about Breaking
Yeah.
Bad before. I think that's a stupendously good written show.
Yeah.
Well-written show.
Yeah, it's the gradual descent of a character into supervillainy.
The thing is, though, if you look at Walter White, he was always kind of a narcissist.
Sure.
He was always kind of a malignant personality. That got way worse over time.
Pun intended?
Oh, I didn't even intend. Man, I never intend my puns.
Oh, man.
No, okay, yeah. So
I was like, dang, that's a great pun, Larry.
No, I never. I
Oh.
didn't know that was just free association. For those of you who haven't seen the show, he's a high school chemistry professor who gets cancer and then starts cooking meth to pay for his cancer.
That's what we all do, basically.
As one does, or build illegal machine guns if it was like slightly different story.
Same
But
thing.
it's honestly, though, think about the character. He doesn't do a 180. It's a gradual. Because he's still the same guy. Because he was just kind of a jerk at the beginning too. Only he kept it in check.
And he even I mean, gosh, episode 1, episode 2 of that series, he's using the illness that he's been afflicted with to just be a complete jerkface. And he's using it as an excuse to do things that he knows are completely wrong and bad.
Yeah. 180 though?
No. It's not a 180.
No.
If we're talking like strict 180s, I don't know that I can think of anything. I'm sure there's one out there because there's always an exception. But I can't think of anything that works for me where it's a complete 180.
No, usually where this works, guys, and the key on this in characters, if you want to have a character change dramatically a direction, think about the clues you put in that character to begin with, and then exploit those flaws or accentuate those strengths. So, because like when I'm writing Son of the Black Sword, I start with Ashok Vidal. He's a pretty horrible person. He burns villages for a living, okay? He is the law. This is fantasy Judge Dredd. He's got his own code of honor, though. He's got his own moral principles. And so, but he has to do a complete change of his purpose in life. Yet it works because he's forced to, like, now be a criminal, but it still works with his same sense of honor. His core individual of who he is never actually changes. He becomes more of a human being, and he learns to not be a complete scumbag. Well, he's never a scumbag because he has his code of honor.
Right.
But it all flows organically.
Well, or think of Valerian in Servants of War. Like, according to this, because Valerian starts out chapter 1, he's a farm kid, and he's honest, he's true to his friends. He's a legit good person. So then, according to this tweet, he should all of a sudden turn into like a supervillain by the end of the show, right?
Yeah, and that
by the end of the
ruin
book.
pretty much the entire fantasy genre and 1,000 other
it's idiotic.
books.
It's idiotic.
Now, that said, though, he does change a lot, and he grows a lot. And
He
we
does.
put him through hell.
But he's consistent.
Well, and at the end, he's still that farm boy at heart.
He is. And he's still a good person.
He's still, and actually, his being a good person actually makes him an anomaly in the world which he lives in.
Well, and he's true to his friends. He's true to his crewmates. He's true to the soldiers fighting next to him, and all of that, in a farm boy setting, that means that he's the kid everyone likes.
Yeah.
In a military setting, it means that he's the guy everyone can rely on. And what I really like doing, Larry, is I like taking characters and their specific characteristics and showing how a very specific characteristic, like say, so in Valerian's case, is his goodness or his trueness, his loyalty, and showing how it can be used in other instances for good, showing how other people perceive it, but also showing how it can be used against him.
Yeah. That's an interesting one too, is because when you set up the character beginning, you as the writer, you know where you're going to take them, kind of. You know what direction you're taking this character in. You can do any sort of flip you want, but you got to build those keys in there. And so if we were to follow this advice, it would just destroy the story, because we would take him from all these good things and make him an interesting character, and we'd throw him away, basically. And the whole catalyst thing, whatever. Don't ever write according to a checklist, people. That's the main key. If you want to have your character flip and become super evil psycho killer, or you want to have your evil psycho killer become a good guy, you can do that, but you got to do it organic. You got to do it smooth.
Yeah.
It's kind of sleight of hand here.
Well, it's just like anything else. I mean, if you're not foreshadowing what's going to happen to a character, just like what's going to happen in a plot and things like that. I mean, think of any heist movie ever made. There's almost always that moment at the end where the person who gets taken advantage of in that situation, they do the rapid fire reminiscence over like all the different things, all the clues that all of a sudden make sense in that guy's head. And you're like, oh, okay, yeah, all of this was foreshadowed.
But yeah, the greatest single one of those ever was Kaiser Soze.
Yeah.
Yeah, honestly, that was like the perfect encapsulation of that trope.
And they're doing that, as the detective or whatever is looking at like the various pieces around the office and seeing the different things that he's mentioned. And then it's counterpointed with Kevin Spacey's character. All of a sudden his walking pattern changes. Yep. And you're like, okay.
That scene's amazing.
Unreliable narrator. I got you.
And it's interesting too, because did that character do a 180? No, because he was always that.
Mm-hmm.
Because if he had done a 180, you couldn't have had all these clues. Because the guy was just telling a giant lie.
Yeah.
Which made it really interesting. Oh, we're almost up a break, but I got to say one thing.
Yeah.
We have a very special second part bad writing advice.
Indeed we do.
Yes, this is a two-parter of bad writing from the same woman.
Done.
It gets even better.
Done. We'll be right back.
The war between Al Masia and the Empire of Kolakovia is in its 100th year. Casualties grow on both sides as the conflict leaves no corner of the world untouched. Ilarion Glaskov's quiet life on the fringes of the Empire is thrown into chaos when an impossible tragedy strikes his village. When he is conscripted into the Tsarist military, he is sent to serve in the Wall, an elite regiment that pilots suits of armors made from the husks of dead golems. But the Great War is not the only, or even the worst, danger facing Illyrian, as he is caught in a millennia-old conflict between two goddesses. He must survive the ravages of trench warfare, horrific monsters from another world, and the treacherous internal politics of the country he serves.
Servants of War, new military fantasy by Master of Horror Steve Diamond and international bestseller Larry Correia. Available on Amazon or wherever fine books are sold. Pick up your copy today.
All right, everybody, welcome back to part 2, as we teased. So, little bit of history. This person who gave the bad advice in the first episode about bad characterness, she doubled down.
Yes, this is where I actually, this first time on an episode, I get to use the bad voice twice. So another author responds, who is a very successful author.
Mm-hmm.
I could probably name him because I'm on his team here. It's Michael Rothman, M.A.
Yeah.
Rothman, and we're gonna actually have him as a guest on the show. I respect him a lot. The dude hustles. You know, so he's a good writer, science fiction dude. And so he responds to her, redacted. As a word of advice from someone who has sold a couple books here and there in multiple languages across many countries, you are not qualified to give advice. You should likely listen more and talk less, and then maybe eventually you'll not give horrid advice. I thought that was actually a fairly diplomatic response for someone who was saying, hey, let's destroy 98% of the stories in the world, okay? So she responds to this in typical Twitter fashion. Excuse me.
Here we go.
Here we go. Thanks for mansplaining and telling a random woman on the internet to shut up because you think she's stupid. I hope I'm smart enough to understand that anyone can write and sell books, even an incel like you.
Oh, gosh.
Thumbs up emoji.
Thumbs up. Oh, well, that's good.
Yeah, so not to be too cruel here, but here's the thing, guys. The reason I brought out this second part is there is good advice and bad advice out there, and there's constructive criticism and destructive criticism.
Correct.
And you guys, listen to constructive criticism, but don't, you guys don't have to listen to bullcrap constructive. You guys don't have to listen to crappy criticism from people who don't know what they're talking about. But the funny thing that made me laugh about this is, so a guy who is actually a USA Today bestseller, an international bestseller, says, hey, that's bad advice. You should probably not give bad advice. You should probably listen more. And the response immediately is, thanks for mansplaining. Well, first off, is she a biologist? How would she know? Okay, so there's that right there. Okay. And he didn't tell her, it wasn't, I would have used more profanity if I had responded, but then, obviously, anyone can write books, even an incel like you, which is funny because, obviously, if you don't like bad writing advice, you have never known the touch of a woman.
Well, and look, I think the deeper issue here is one of how you respond to criticism when it's leveled at you. And look, every single person out there, when you're a writer, you're going to receive criticism. Sometimes it's going to be from the editors who are giving you advice on how to improve your craft. Sometimes it's going to be from readers and reviewers who, maybe they do or do not like your story.
Sometimes, it's feedback from fans. They might be right. They might be wrong. Sometimes it's feedback from detractors who just want to tear you down.
Yes.
And you got to recognize, I had one that was actually kind of funny. I responded to yesterday, I think. And so John C. Wright, great writer, good dude. John C. Wright actually plugged some of my stuff on his blog. And in the comments, never read the comments on other people's blogs. Never. Some guy actually likes my books, but he said something about like, well, I had a snort of derision when I read Grim Noir because he got his blimp so wrong. Keep in mind, it's a fantasy novel, right? He got his dirigible so wrong because he describes them in feet. They should be described in yards because they're huge. He totally underestimates how big these were, which is funny because I do my research. I'm like a research junkie. So I immediately responded, and I actually had most of the numbers like in my head still because that's kind of dork I am. And I was like, dude, the Hindenburg was 814 feet long. The Akron was like 780 feet long, and so I'm going through, And you talk about, this guy said, well, in my youth, I was on one of the Navy programs for dirigibles, and he doesn't realize how huge. I go. The last Navy dirigible is 178 feet long, and then I started listing the numbers from Grimoire, and it's like the Kaga class was 900 feet long. So and so I told the guy, I was like, so unless you're the world's oldest man who is somehow, you're 130 years old and you're here posting on the internet, nah, I'll take constructive criticism, but I won't take bullcrap criticism.
That's right.
And I actually didn't say bullcrap, but
well, yeah,
we're on the air. But no, so the thing is, so be aware, guys, when you take criticism off people, some people are just full of crap and they just want to whine about stuff on the internet. Other times, you might actually be wrong. You might be barking up the wrong tree here.
Well, and I think the biggest thing here, which is obviously what this the person who wrote these series of tweets is incapable of doing, apparently, and that's showing a little bit of self-reflection. And I think one of the biggest strengths that that new writers can cultivate, and maybe some old writers can, teach, old dog new tricks and all that crap, is to have that introspection. It's a talent that can be learned.
Yeah, and here's the thing, guys, you got to have kind of rhino hide in this business.
Mm-hmm.
So you got to find the fine line. Too many writers, we get really hung up in our own heads. It's because, it's the nature of being a writer. You're a creative type person. A lot of us get really, really sensitive. But what you need to do is kind of take this stuff as it comes, be analytical. Sometimes they might have a valid point. Other times they might be full of it. But you need to just kind of look and don't break down and be like, oh no, someone criticized me. It's the end of the world. You're going to get criticized.
Oh, there's no.
People are not going to like your stuff.
There are no exceptions to this rule.
No, the greatest writers who have ever lived have had 1-star reviews.
Oh yeah.
Like tons of them. And probably, some of the greatest writers who've ever lived. We have never seen their stuff because they broke down in tears and never wrote anything again after the first time someone yelled at them.
I think this is something really important for new writers, Larry, because, and I'll admit that have struggled with this and continue to struggle with this at times. And that's, sometimes I think, man, I don't know. I just don't know if I'm good enough for this. Am I good enough?
That's a common feeling.
I think a lot of new authors, and I think there's a lot of very, very great authors that run through life, under a constant onslaught of imposter syndrome.
Well, yeah, I'm not a big Neil Gaiman fan. I like Terry Pratchett, but I'm not a big Neil Gaiman fan. But I've heard Neil Gaiman talk about his imposter syndrome, and he's Neil Gaiman. He's sold, how many tens of millions of books?
He sold like
everything.
World.
Yeah, the guy has sold millions and millions and millions of books in everywhere in the world for decades. So, clearly the guy is not an imposter, but even he struggles with that.
Yep.
It's the kind of thing that happens.
Now, back in ye olden times when I used to be a book reviewer, oftentimes I framed my reviews with whether, constructive criticism, more or less. It's a small business, so it's a small world out there. So I never really stooped to personal attacks against authors and stuff like that, with one exception, and that was Dan Brown.
Yeah, I remember that review, actually.
Yeah, that's a great review. Anyway.
Well, the guy jumped out of a helicopter and then parachuted because of his coat.
Yeah.
If I remember correctly.
Well, and the villains he created in some of his, especially his third book.
Oh, the hulking albino? Oh, was that? No, that was.
Yeah, that's the one.
Was that? Oh my gosh.
In the Lost Symbol.
Oh, that was so bad.
Speaking of character consistency, we'll kind of tie these two together. There's consistency, and then there's like
Dan Brown
using just trope after trope after trope and stuff that you're just
and
like,
I
man,
love tropes
this is
too,
but
you gotta be careful.
His was a checklist.
They're tools in the toolbox, not just don't beat the manuscript with the toolbox.
Yeah, exactly. But anyway, my whole point is that in those times, I would write a lot of criticism about people's books, and their characters specifically, because that's kind of what I care most about, is character consistency, character growth. And oftentimes, I would have some authors contact me and say, well, you just didn't understand my book. You just didn't understand the character. Okay. And I'm like, okay, well, whatever.
Yeah, sure.
And then Oftentimes, on the other side, I would also have people email me and say, dang, I didn't even realize that was a thing. When you're writing a book, guys, oftentimes you're way too close to the forest to see any of the trees. You're so close to the forest that, your face is like rubbing up against the tree and you're like, am I on sandpaper? Like, I don't even know. You're not even sure what's going on anymore.
I've actually had negative reviews that I read them and go, yeah, that's fair. I mean, I see it like, well, this felt like, this could have been better. And I was like, yeah, that's fair.
Yeah.
And I've seen other reviews where it's like, nah, this guy's smoking crack. He's full.
Yeah.
He has no flipping idea what he's talking about. That said, there's the advice of most authors should not respond to their critics, especially in public. I've actually kind of gone, I do it, but I always do it. Make sure I do it in a fun way.
Yeah.
So from a marketing perspective, don't be the guy that like, there's some pretty legendary indie authors. I try to remember the one, but remember Empress Teresa?
Yeah.
Just mentioning this book might get us sued because seriously, this dude, like when people criticize his work, he just goes like crazy. It's nuts. But like what I do is like I've responded to some. I'll take my dumbest reviews, like obviously the most silly ones, and then I'll respond to those and do a blog post of them. And I've had a lot of fun with that. But make sure it fits with your branding and your marketing and your and so me it's in good. Like for one was like, well, this was stupid. You'd be better off spending your money on a magazine. And I put up a picture of Cat Fancy. And I was like, I recommend Cat Fancy. I don't know why I picked Cat Fancy. Just seemed like it'd be a cat lady. And one of them was, because this was a couple years ago, was somebody's ripping on Monster Hunter. And they're like, 1 star. This is stupid and horrible. If you want good urban fan, this is stupid, dumb, right-wing, gun nut, macho fiction. If you want good urban fantasy, read Jim Butcher. And so I responded as like, well, luckily, Jim Butcher likes stupid, dumb, urban fan or macho gun nut fantasy. Because check out his new story in the Monster Hunter anthology coming out. So I plugged Jim's story in Monster Hunter. So you can do it. You just gotta like be cool about it with whatever your brand is.
All right, so let's wrap these 2 terrible tweets together, Larry. So
this is just a great learning.
We're talking about criticism, and we're talking about. In the first part was talking about character growth, development, consistency. So what I'm wondering, Larry, is has there been a time in your career in which someone has given you good advice on maybe some character growth potential or some inconsistencies or whatever that you used in your own writing?
Oh gosh, yeah. Yeah, I'm trying to think of specific examples here, but like Tony Weisskopf, super genius editor, and there's been times like in the Monster Hunter series especially where she would point out little things that I'm having characters do, and she'd say something like, Larry, I can see what you're doing here, but I feel like you, the author, are doing your personality, not this character's personality.
That's interesting.
What would this character do in that situation? Not what would you do?
Okay, and what was your immediate gut check response?
Well, it's like when I first was starting out, here goes to character growth. When I was first starting out, I would take every suggestion like that and I would get a little prickly. Like, oh, well, I'm an artiste. But then after a little while, I'm like, well, to be fair, she's right. So to be analytical about this stuff, she's correct. And that is spot on. And also all of the years I've learned to trust Tony implicitly because she knows more about books than just about everybody.
She's forgotten more than you'll learn.
No, the entire time we've worked together, there's been like maybe 2 or 3 times that like I've like actively disagreed with her on one thing or the other. And they've usually been like minor things. But overall, overwhelmingly, she knows this stuff so well. And she's a step back. Like, which again, you're saying you're the author, you're the guy in the trees. The editor is the person outside of the forest who can see the whole thing.
Well, I mean, we've talked about this on previous episodes when we were going back and forth on Servants of War, and how it just seemed like every time the document would pass back and forth, I kind of felt like I was getting a little further removed from it because it was changing in front of my eyes. But when I've done stuff on my own and when you've done stuff on your own, you finish the story, you send it off, and then your brain is still in it, and feedback comes back, and you're like, oh man, I don't even like. Doesn't the reader understand what's in my head that I haven't put down on paper? Dang it! And then, but the editors are 100% removed. They just get a document. It's a blind read for them.
Theoretically, if you have a good editor, there's some bad editors out there, but that's a whole different topic.
That's a whole different topic.
We'll
get Jim Mintz on to talk about that.
Yeah, Jim's great. Well, this is a funny episode because we had like two totally divergent things, but it was so funny because it was in one set of tweets.
Yeah.
It was just
so much wrong in so little time.
It was so much wrong in so little time. Horrible, stupid, bad character advice followed up by immediately reflexive, how dare you correct me?
Well, and that's the thing, guys. You got to understand, when you receive criticism from a trustworthy source, understand that, oftentimes it's not a personal attack. They're not telling you that you're wrong because they hate you. Maybe they're just telling you wrong because you're wrong.
Yeah. Especially, because if we had gone back and if like we were to make this like good, take this and edit it into good advice, it would be like one type of story. You can start with the character who has a huge diametric organic change to who they are. But when you make these broad pronouncements, I remember one of the very first episodes we did is beware anybody that tells you there's absolute rules to writing.
Right.
There are many suggestions. Because for every rule that someone gives us on the internet, inevitably we can find 100 examples of people who violated that rule and wrote an extremely good story.
That's right. Again, the only rule is, are you entertaining?
Yep.
All right. Well, that's all the time we have for you today. Thanks again for tuning into the Writer Dojo. And like Larry said in the beginning, if you stumble across super terrible, awful, no good, horrible, bad advice, you know who will read it in a bad voice. That's Larry. And then I'll laugh the whole time. All right, guys, take it easy.
Writer Dojo is Steve Diamond and Larry Correia. Produced by Jack Wilder and Bear and Hare Studios. Theme song, Word Mercenaries by Craig Nybo. New episodes come out every Wednesday wherever you stream your content. If you enjoyed this podcast, you can help support us by going to anchor.fm/WriterDojo, by leaving a 5-star rating and review, and by helping to spread the word. To advertise on the Writer Dojo, email ads@writerdojo.com. All questions and comments can be emailed to questions@writerdojo.com.
Oh, good grief.